Last week, as I was browsing vegan Reddit for video ideas, I came across this post. Another one bites the dust. Ali Tabrizi, Seaspiracy director, no longer vegan. I usually ignore ex-vegans because I don't want to give them more attention, and they tend to use the same tired arguments to justify no longer being vegan. But this one is different. Not only does Ali use arguments I've never heard before, and some of them are truly bizarre, but I think his ex-veganism reveals a larger trend that some people in the Reddit comments were picking up on. He got into the alt-right pipeline. He is probably making small logical steps daily that make sense, but end up with eating full carnivore and suppressing women's rights. In this video, we're going to explore the alt-right to ex-vegan pipeline. I'm going to debunk Ali's arguments, show how they reflect alt-right ideology, highlight one very sexist comment he made, and discuss other alt-right ex-vegans like Russell Brand. Before we get into Ali's specific arguments, let me clarify what I mean by alt-right and the pipeline concept. I'm talking about a loose network of political movements characterized by authoritarianism, traditional gender hierarchies, appeals to natural order, and anti-intellectualism. The pipeline refers to how people are gradually introduced to these ideas through seemingly non-political entry points. Fitness content, self-help, dietary advice that slowly introduce broader political themes. I am not saying that every ex-vegan is alt-right, but there's a specific pattern where certain ex-vegan content creators use arguments that mirror alt-right recruitment strategies, and some, like Ali, do end up creating explicitly right-wing political content alongside their anti-vegan messaging, like this video where he idolizes Jordan Peterson. So, why is Ali no longer vegan in the first place? When I saw the top comment on this Reddit thread, I thought people were joking because it's about vegan marshmallows. Surely no one would stop being vegan because of marshmallows, right? Well, it turns out that buying vegan marshmallows shook Ali's world. But before we get into the marshmallows, let's talk about the way Ali starts this whole video, which immediately made me feel icky.
I just want to get this out of the way in case people don't think I was fully vegan. Believe me, you're wrong. I was probably more vegan than you've ever been.
He's saying that he's more vegan than everyone else, and if you disagree with that, then you're wrong. Personally, I don't think of veganism in terms of if I'm more vegan than other vegans, unless my husband makes fun of me for eating tofu straight out of the package, and then I joke about how I am the superior vegan. To me, this focus on being more vegan reveals that Ali's veganism was based on status and ego more than actual concern for animals. We can see this again when he says that he felt morally superior for being vegan and looked down on non-vegans.
Judging and condemning other people for not being vegan and claiming myself to be more morally superior started to kind of gross me out, actually.
If you go vegan because you want to come across as a good person or be better than others, then that is a problem. It reminds me of Charlie Houpert, who also started eating meat again after a rightward shift, and he said the same thing. This makes sense in the context of alt-right thinking because that worldview is very concerned with hierarchy and status. When someone's veganism is primarily about positioning themselves above others rather than genuine ethical concern for animals, they're already operating within a hierarchical mindset that the alt-right exploits. We can also see this in the way Ali now talks about vegans.
I've actually found that vegans are the most reluctant to donate to animal charities a lot of the time because they believe that they're doing enough.
There are plenty of examples of his newfound moral superiority, but I especially want to talk about this one because it's so out of touch with reality. Vegans constantly donate to animal charities, and I know because I work for an organization that takes donations, and most of our donors are vegan. I've personally donated thousands of dollars to sanctuaries and animal rights groups since going vegan. We can also glance at Jake Conroy's Patreon, where over 400 people donate every month. I would bet a year's supply of nutritional yeast that most of his patrons are vegan. The alt-right recruitment process often involves offering people a different hierarchy where they can maintain their sense of superiority. Instead of being more ethical than meat eaters, they become more realistic than naive vegans or more in touch with nature than urban elites. The underlying psychological need for status remains the same, only the framework changes. We can see this way of thinking when Ali makes the case that backyard eggs are more ethical than any other foods. He implies that vegans don't usually talk about backyard eggs because they're not as visually striking as slaughterhouses, which makes us sound manipulative. I feel like I talk about backyard eggs all the time, and I'll be the first to say that I don't even think they're in the same moral category as buying eggs from a grocery store, but I still don't support them. More on that in a minute. Allie gives the usual arguments vegans make against backyard eggs, like it's objectification and chickens have been bred to lay too many eggs, but those arguments are not good enough for him because of this.
The idea that eating a backyard egg is unethical and immoral, and that somewhere between that chicken laying it and you grabbing it, something deeply wrong has just occurred, really, really breaks down when you compare it to the alternative. So what is the alternative to an egg for a vegan? The answer is tofu.
Well, on the surface, it looks like he's just comparing tofu to eggs. The comparison perfectly encapsulates alt-right narratives about urban elites versus rural self-sufficiency. He frames tofu as the product of industrial agriculture, global shipping, factory processing, and urban consumption. Everything that represents the artificial globalized world of cosmopolitan elites. Meanwhile, the backyard eggs represent local production and authentic connection to the land. This isn't really an ethical comparison about animal welfare. It's a cultural and political comparison between two ways of life. The vegan eating tofu becomes a symbol of everything wrong with modern liberal society. The person raising backyard chickens becomes the idealized alt-right figure, self-reliant and connected to nature. This backyard egg argument sounds intuitive until you actually run the numbers. A hen lays at most 1 egg per day, which is about 70 calories. And that's only when they're young, as their egg production drops throughout their life. But I want to make these numbers concrete, so let's say that you're trying to get 25% of your daily calories from eggs, roughly 500 calories a day. In that case, you'd need about 9 young hens per person. Multiply that by the US population, and you're looking at 3 billion backyard chickens, each needing feed, water, and space. Although Allie says chickens can live on food scraps, that's not true because it can cause deficiencies and health issues. In reality, feeding those hens would require 136 million tons of grain per year. They'd also consume over 217 billion gallons of water and produce 543 million tons of manure. That's not counting the vet care, and most vets are not vegan, so you're still paying non-vegans. Meanwhile, replacing that same 25% of calories with tofu would require only about 38,000 square miles of farmland, roughly the size of Kentucky, and a fraction of the water, land, and emissions. So no, this isn't some clear-cut case where a backyard egg wins. He's just proposing a solution that's impossible to scale. Another argument Allie uses may come across as left-wing, but it's just another attempt to paint vegans as elitist.
I've seen countless street interviews now from very well-known vegan activists who, speak to a mother who's pushing a pram, and she said, I'd love to go vegan. I reduce wherever I can, but I just can't do it because I find it too difficult, it's too expensive. And she will inevitably be given this slogan from the vegan activist that's been rehearsed 100 times, which is rice and beans.
This bugs me because when we highlight rice and beans, we're not telling people to only live on rice and beans. We're pointing out that plant-based staples are the cheapest foods at the grocery store. And I usually cite this study from Oxford that shows that vegan diets are 30% cheaper than omnivore diets in Western countries, which is where all of my outreach takes place. The broader point activists are making is that when most of your diet comes from cheaper foods, you can splurge on plant-based substitutes some of the time. But his framing of the argument reveals how alt-right narratives work. He takes a point about food costs and transforms it into evidence of vegan elitism and condescension. By focusing on the single mother pushing a stroller, he creates a sympathetic figure that vegans are supposedly patronizing, even though the actual data supports the affordability argument. This allows Allie to dismiss economic evidence while positioning vegans as out-of-touch elites who don't understand real working-class struggles. This is classic alt-right rhetoric. Take a marginalized group, in this case struggling single mothers, position them as victims of condescension, and then use their struggles to dismiss progressive arguments entirely. It doesn't matter that vegan diets are actually more affordable. What matters is creating the narrative that vegans are privileged elites talking down to hard-working, regular people. Personally, going vegan over vegetarian was a no-brainer for me, not only because of ethics, but because I was living on poverty wages in the service industry for years. So I never bought cheese because I considered it an unnecessary luxury. Ali paints us as elitists again when he talks about the hundreds of millions of people who can't go vegan due to health issues.
There are countless autoimmune diseases and issues and ailments that people have that really limits the amounts of or types of food that they can eat.
Of course, he cites no evidence that these issues make it impossible for people to go vegan, and there are plenty of vegans who do have these conditions, many of whom are the very activists he's insulting. Ali also ignores the definition of veganism, which is to avoid animal exploitation as far as practicable and possible. If someone legitimately could not go 100% plant-based because of health issues, but still reduced animal products as much as they could, then they would fit within the vegan definition. Ali brings up people with autoimmune diseases not because he's genuinely advocating for disabled people's needs, but because he's weaponizing their struggles to defend his own choices. It's the same way the alt-right will invoke women's rights when attacking trans people, or bring up working-class struggles when defending billionaires. They don't actually care about these groups, they just use them as convenient talking points. There's also an element of biological essentialism here, the idea that our biology is our destiny and we shouldn't try to change natural patterns. This fits perfectly into alt-right thinking about accepting hierarchies and natural order. Instead of seeing health challenges as problems to solve through medical support or cell-cultured meat, he frames them as proof that trying to avoid animal exploitation is fundamentally misguided. Also notice how he dismisses the scientific consensus that plant-based diets are healthy. This anti-intellectual stance mirrors how the alt-right approaches climate science or other areas where the evidence doesn't support their preferred narrative. When science doesn't fit into their worldview, they ignore it and appeal to common sense instead. The health argument is also classic alt-right fear-mongering. He's trying to make people scared that veganism will hurt them or their families. Instead of presenting balanced information about how plant-based diets work for most people, he focuses on worst-case scenarios and rare medical conditions to create anxiety about making dietary changes. The alt-right loves to take isolated examples of problems and blow them up into existential threats. The goal isn't to have an honest conversation about health. It's to make people too afraid to even try going vegan. And by positioning himself as the voice of reason, warning people about these dangers, he gets to play the role of protector while vegans become the reckless extremists, putting vulnerable people at risk. Throughout this video, Ali uses Christian rhetoric to augment his ex-veganism, which is another trait of alt-right thinking. I'm not saying that every Christian is alt-right, but I want to touch on it because it's similar to Russell Brand's ex-vegan arc.
A Pharisee and a tax collector both went into the temple to pray. And the Pharisee walks in and he goes to God, thank you, God, for, I'm so thankful I'm not like that other man over there. I'm so just, I'm so awesome. I give tithes of everything I own, and I'm not an adulterer, I'm not this, I fast twice a week, I'm this and that. Whereas the tax collector doesn't even raise his eyes and he beats his chest and he just says, God have mercy on me, a sinner. And the parable goes that the tax collector goes back to his home justified, whereas the Pharisee goes back home condemned because of his prayers were tainted with his pride and his arrogance.
Ali frames his former vegan activism through the story of Pharisee and the tax collector, positioning veganism as pride and his current stance as humble acceptance of reality. But this isn't about personal spiritual reflection. He reframes abandoning progressive causes as moral growth rather than moral retreat. The religious language provides cover for what might otherwise look like giving up on helping others. Instead, he's avoiding the sin of pride and embracing humility. I agree with his main point that we shouldn't reduce someone's goodness down to what they eat. I actually made a whole video about that if you want to check it out. But animal rights isn't about being a good person. It's about rejecting animal exploitation. But Ali's religious reframing is crucial to alt-right recruitment because it offers moral justification for abandoning compassionate causes. What's particularly insidious is how this co-opts genuine Christian values of humility and service to others, twisting them into justifications for abandoning the vulnerable, in this case, the animals. Many Christians are deeply committed to animal rights precisely because of their faith. But the alt-right version of Christianity tends to emphasize human dominion over creation rather than stewardship and compassion. We can see more evidence of how Ali buys into natural hierarchies when he says this.
There's either buying an extremely expensive option or asking my very pregnant wife of now 2, nearly 3 kids to hand make date bars every week, when she doesn't have enough time or energy to do that, or just buy the product that was next to it that was actually, I think, a bit cheaper, and has a bit of honey in it.
This is particularly telling because it never occurred to Ali that he could make the protein bars himself. The domestic labor is automatically assumed to be his wife's responsibility, and when that becomes too burdensome, his solution is to abandon his ethical position rather than redistribute the household tasks. This reflects classic alt-right thinking about traditional gender roles, where men are the providers and decision makers and women handle domestic duties. He presents women staying in the kitchen as a given, and even something as simple as making homemade snack bars becomes evidence of progressive vegan overreach rather than an opportunity for a more equitable distribution of household labor. Okay, now let's talk about the marshmallows. Basically, Ali wanted to buy vegan marshmallows for a camping trip with his family, and he had to drive 60 minutes to a specialty vegan store where he spent $16 on a bag of marshmallows, and it made him question the efficacy of expensive vegan substitutes. Just to be clear, these were $4.99 in the US, and other Australians told me that they've seen vegan marshmallows for less than $16. But let's just agree with Ali's premise on the cost for now. He says that he could have bought the animal-based, or regular marshmallows as he called them, for $2.50 and donated a few of the dollars he saved to animal charities, and that would have done more good for animals. This argument perfectly illustrates Ali's fundamental misunderstanding of veganism. He frames it as a simple cost-benefit analysis, but this creates a false binary that ignores the core principle of veganism, that animals aren't commodities to be used for human purposes. When we buy products containing animal ingredients, we're not just making a financial transaction, we're participating in and legitimizing a system that treats sentient individuals as units of production. His argument also relies on the premise that gelatin is a byproduct of animal slaughter. In reality, slaughterhouses make money from selling gelatin. Without the gelatin industry, they would have to pay to dispose these animal parts, which would make the entire business model less profitable. When we buy gelatin, we're contributing to the revenue stream that keeps slaughterhouses economically viable. More importantly, Ali's logic could justify virtually any purchase of animal products. Why buy any vegan alternative when you could buy the cheaper animal version and donate the difference? Why not eat factory-farmed meat and then donate to farm sanctuaries? Imagine applying this same logic to fast fashion. Instead of buying ethically made clothing that ensures fair wages and safe working conditions, you could buy cheaper clothes made in sweatshops and donate the savings to labor rights organizations. On the surface, this might seem like you're doing more good, but the logic is fundamentally flawed because your purchase is still supporting and legitimizing the exploitative system you claim to oppose. Every fast fashion purchase signals market demand for cheap labor, helps keep sweatshops profitable, and treats workers as expendable resources. The charitable donation doesn't undo the harm of your purchase decision, it just creates a moral accounting system where exploitation can be offset by good intentions. We would rightfully reject this argument when it comes to human rights, and the same principle applies to animal rights. The marshmallow argument also ignores that purchasing vegan products serves important functions beyond personal purity. It supports companies developing plant-based alternatives, signals market demand for animal-free options, and helps normalize veganism in ways that make it more accessible for others. The opportunity cost argument he uses could be applied to any unnecessary purchase. Why go on vacation with your family when you can just donate that money? But Ali selectively applies it only to specialty vegan products, revealing that this isn't really about maximizing good. It's about finding justifications to abandon ethical consistency. I think if we only look at veganism through a supply and demand lens, we're missing the point because that's putting all of us into a little box labeled consumer. But we're much more than consumers. We're citizens and communities, and our actions can help change culture away from animal exploitation or help normalize it. By rejecting animal exploitation 100%, we signal to others that none of it is okay, and they're more likely to view the issue with the seriousness it deserves. The marshmallow argument positions ethical consistency as impractical purity, while framing participation in harmful systems as mature pragmatism. It's the same pattern we see everywhere in alt-right thinking. Maintaining evil systems is rebranded as wise, while actually challenging those systems is mocked as childish virtue signaling. There is so much more I could say about Ali's video and Substack, but it would take forever, so I'm going to do a rapid fire round of miscellaneous things that pissed me off. First, the title of his video, Why I'm Leaving Veganism 100% and You Might Too After This. It comes off like his arguments are going to be so groundbreaking when they're not, although I will say that they are unique. Second, how he spends basically 45 minutes insulting vegan activists, and then when we push back, people see it and say, wow, Ali is right, you've angered the vegan cult. When the reasons we're angry because we've been mischaracterized and mocked are completely valid. But reacting negatively, of course, makes us look unreasonable. Third, there's this part in his Substack where he uses the crop deaths argument and says that it's an uncomfortable reality vegans never acknowledge. I literally cannot go one day without acknowledging crop deaths, and I'll just do a quick debunk here. Animals eat more plants than if you eat plants directly. There are more crop deaths for meat than plant-based foods. But what bothered me the most is how he projected the huge ego he had around being vegan onto all activists, and then attacked us for something that most of us don't believe. All right, I am going to stop there. Let me know down below what you thought of his arguments. Do you think he's going to go even further toward the alt-right? When do you think he'll be a full-blown carnivore? Leave your bet in the comments. If you want to support my work, donate to my Patreon. If you liked this video, you'll like this fascist one. Otherwise, I will see you next time.